Poštovani gledaoci, situacija u Evropi će biti možda najgora u posljednjih nekoliko decenija kada je u pitanju energetska, ali i politička situacija. Razlog svemu tome jeste rat koji se vodi između Rusije i Ukrajine. Evropska unija također ima problem sa Zapadnim Balkanom, u najvišem redu sa Bosnom i Hercegovinom, ali isto tako pregovorima između Srbije i Kosova, ali isto tako i sa neaktivnošću Evropskog komesara za proširenje Mađara Olivera Varheljija. Upravo o tome šta se dešava i kakva je trenutna situacija razgovarat ćemo sa potpredsjednicom kluba Renew u Evropskom parlamentu i mađarskom eurozastupnicom Katalin Cseh, koja je naša gošća. Mr. Cseh, welcome to program N1.
Hello, thank you for having me.
About a month ago, your colleague in European Parliament, Tineke Strik, has published a series of tweets regarding electoral law in Bosnia and Herzegovina and elections, which are coming in just over a month. And you replied to one of her tweets and you said, I share the concerns and recommendations of my MEP colleague Tineke Strik. Changes to the electoral law proposed by the OHR-BIH threaten to divide Bosnia and Herzegovina even further along ethnic sectarian lines. They should be withdrawn and redrafted in a more inclusive process. This was by yourself and Mrs. Strik, a criticism towards Mr. Christian Schmidt, the High Representative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and you said that these will divide Bosnia and Herzegovina even further along ethnic and sectarian lines. Can you go a bit more in detail? What is your opinion about the proposed changes to the electoral law in Bosnia?
Well, obviously, it is of everybody's interest, and I believe every politician in the European Union is wholeheartedly supporting a free and fair and transparent electoral process in Bosnia. So I believe that a big part of the proposed legislative changes are going into a very good direction. However, one part of the package that was also withdrawn after criticisms was certainly very worrying for some of my colleagues and also myself. We believe that an inclusive democracy should prevail, where the respect for minority rights are prevalent, and maybe this proposal or at least parts of it wasn't necessarily thought through to the extent that the society would have appreciated it. There were very severe criticisms from the civil society and also from international actors. And I'm hoping that in the future, this will be the trajectory of reform proposals, to be more inclusive, to consult with the population on the ground, and try to avoid furthering divides, but rather trying to unite the nation.
Can Bosnia and Herzegovina move forward towards European Union with these ethnic divisions and basically preventing some of the people from Bosnia and Herzegovina, such as Jews and other minorities, as Roma minority, to be even candidates for electoral positions and to be at least in name pretending to come to one of the positions in Bosnia and Herzegovina?
I very firmly believe that Bosnia and Herzegovina has a European future, and there has to be a path for membership and accession. However, also there are some concerns that needs to be taken care of prior to that. And for instance, that we still see that judgments of the European Court are not being implemented in regards of minority representation. But also the further deepening divides in the society are not good signs in this process. So I very much hope that this can be reconciled and every single citizen of Bosnia and Herzegovina will be able to run for office, to have representation, no matter how they define their identity or which minority they belong to.
Yeah, I have another question, which is more closer to you because you're Hungarian MEP. Viktor Orban is preventing any potential sanctions against Milorad Dodik in Bosnia and Herzegovina. You're one of the MEPs who have called consistently for sanctions against Mr. Dodik. Why you're asking for sanctions against Mr. Dodik, and why Viktor Orban is trying to protect him?
Well, unfortunately, I believe that Mr. Dodik's recent statements and the political steps he has taken in terms of making the existing problems even more deep, even more radical, are very, very dangerous for the stability of the country and for the entire region. And this is why I firmly believe that the United States have already imposed sanctions, so the European Union should join in these sanctions. These sanctions should be coordinated, and we have to take every step that is necessary to ensure the stability of the country, which is, of course, a very key and important partner for all of us and the country that we care about so much. I don't think that Mr. Dodik's recent steps are constructive or are even beneficial for the sake of peace and security and stability. So I find it very disturbing indeed that Mr. Orban has decided to fund his electoral campaign with a big chunk of Hungarian taxpayers' money, and also some of the very inflammatory statements that Mr. Orban has made in terms of the Bosnian and Croatian tensions in your country are very clear interference. And I don't think that other countries should intervene to this extent, and particularly not a leader who cries for an intervention every time an article is being published abroad. What he is doing is very clearly a dangerous meddling in the political affairs of a country which is already in a very fragile situation.
We have another player who's Hungarian, and that's a person whose initials are OV and who's probably the one of the least known commissioners in the European Commission. That's Oliver Varhelyi, who's almost non-existent as a commissioner for enlargement. You and your colleagues in European Parliament have called for investigation against him and all related to his connections and actions related to Mr. Dodik in Republika Srpska. Should Ursula von der Leyen take a step to deal with Oliver Varhelyi, not only because of these actions regarding Mr. Dodik and Republika Srpska, but also because he's almost non-existent. We don't see him here in the region. The enlargement process is way slow in the last 2 years, especially when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially when it comes to Northern Macedonia and Albania, which just barely started negotiations with the EU.
Well, I believe to start with, it was a huge mistake to give Hungary the portfolio of enlargement, given the history of the Orban government's frequent meddling in the political affairs of the region, and also questionable financing deals that are unfortunately tied to some of the political actors that do not necessarily share the European Union's political line. And some steps of Mr. Varhelyi has indeed been very questionable, and I think that the European Parliament has to extend its scrutiny powers over the financing deals that are being struck, over the statements that are being made, and also about the possibility of providing European political support of some of the secessionist tendencies that are clearly not in line with how the European Union perceives an inclusive and stable and peaceful democracy in some of the countries, or including Bosnia. Mr. Varhelyi represents the European Union. However, I feel sometimes that he is mostly representing the Hungarian government's line. And this is absolutely not what this position should be about. It's about a European path, a European future, a neutral arbitrator, and I'm afraid that he is not always living up to the expectations that his job has for which is essential for his job.
Yeah, let me ask you a few questions about the region before I move to the larger European stage. Recently, we had a agreement between Serbia and Kosovo, which was brokered by Varhelyi's colleague on the other side of foreign policy, Mr. Borrell. How do you see that situation between Serbia and Kosovo at this point?
I'm glad that the European Union was helpful as a mediator when it comes to resolving this conflict. It is very clear that tensions are very high in the entire neighborhood, and Russia is proactively trying to exploit it and create divisions and problems in the immediate neighborhood of the European Union. So this is why it's so essential that we should have a strong European presence there. We should also provide a clear European pathway for these countries, more engagement, more involvement, so that we can solve these problems together in a European manner, and not to let malign foreign interference create more tensions just for the sake of trying to weaken the European Union.
Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has claimed just over the last weekend that because of situation with Kosovo, the tensions with Kosovo and open Balkan situation, he needs to cancel Euro Pride in Belgrade. We know how important minority rights are on the way towards European Union. What is your comment on that situation?
I find it absolutely outrageous to hear the reasoning of Mr. Vučić. There was a promise made. There are organizations being in place. The event is supposed to be happening very shortly. And backtracking from it with so made up reasons obviously do not help to support a community who is actually fighting a very hard fight in the society, who is doing a great job, great progress, and who are very brave for standing up for their rights. So I really hope that they will reconsider this decision. Ana Brnabić, the prime minister who just got confirmed on the very same day where the Euro Pride decision was made, prior to this, formally gave her word to the organizers that the Euro Pride can take place. So I hope they do not walk back on this promise, because the Serbian LGBTQ community needs to be able to show to the world how strong and brave they are.
You have mentioned malign influences here in the region of Western Balkans. Serbia and Republika Srpska, both of those political entities, they have close relationships with Russia. Serbian Interior Minister Aleksandar Vulin just recently met with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in Moscow. We will also have a soon visit of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan here to Croatia and to Bosnia, and also to Serbia, but also we have threats by Russian ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina that if Bosnia moves towards NATO, that the Russia will need to give some sort of answer or reaction to that. So how do you judge those malign influences here in the region at the moment?
Well, very clearly, Russia is trying to expand its sphere of influence. We see it at other points of Europe that sometimes they are doing it with deals, sometimes they're doing it with negotiations, sometimes media manipulation, but also at other points they are doing it with weapons. So I really hope that the citizens of Bosnia, but also of the whole Balkans, are paying close attention to what is happening in Ukraine. Russia is not a benevolent partner. I know that the recent steps of the European Union has not been satisfactory for many of the citizens living in your countries. And I do share your frustration with the slowness of the enlargement process and of the empty promises that were made over the past years. But really turning towards Russia is not an answer. And you have a strong partner in the European Parliament who believes in enlargement, who believes in the European path and European future of the Balkan countries. So I really hope that we can work together and we can move forward based on the values of solidarity, inclusiveness, and democracy, because this is the best way, I believe, to develop your society to a point where it can really flourish. The Russian influence is only providing very slow term, very short-term solutions. But on the long term, it is not a mutually beneficial partnership. It is not a partnership where the voices of your countries would be heard. And these countries who are moving towards Russia are openly siding with the aggressor in a bloody and terrible war that is terrible to an extent that I think no one of us could have imagined to witness it in our lifetimes.
Let's go back to Viktor Orban. Just weeks ago, he was talking about non-nations. Also, he spoke at the CPAC in the United States, calling his political and media and non-governmental opponents idiots. I must quote him because that's the word which he used. But also, he often cries about the sea which was taken away from Hungary, but he spends a whole month on vacation in Croatia. Isn't this quite interesting situation with him, that he's claiming something about that sea, but he spends time there, but also all these recent statements which draw so much consternation across Europe?
Well, frankly, the past 12 years of governance in Hungary clearly showed how to erode a democracy, how to destroy the democratic foundations of a country, and how to steer back, in rhetorics at least, but also with policy at many times, to very dark and distant ages of our history. I find it truly despicable that he talks about issues like race mixing in a country that is as diverse as ours, that he is openly trying to stoke tensions with our neighbors without any justification in a time period where we are all united in the European Union. I think it's dangerous. But also very distasteful to hear these comments. And I can only say that Hungary is not only Mr. Orban. We have a lot of people who profoundly disagree with him. And I believe that the majority of our country, no matter the election results, how they look like, are indeed welcoming people with a good heart who do not want bad things to happen to people who are not conforming to a quote-unquote traditional Hungarian perception. Diversity is our strength, and I think we Hungarians have to embrace it.
European Union will face with probably the largest ever crisis in its foundation due to this war between Russia and Ukraine. Energy crisis, food crisis, crisis, all possible kinds of crisis. Are you satisfied with how European Union and European countries are reacting to this, and what we might expect to see in the months ahead of us, especially during the winter times? And are you going to work as European Parliament with the member nations to find the solutions for all these issues? Because when we are talking here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are talking about 3 million people, but when you're talking in European Parliament, you're talking about more than 400 million people living in European Union at the moment.
Well, this situation where Europe is at right now is a very clear sign on where dependency on Russia can bring a nation or a community. We had an extremely short-sighted energy policy over the past decade, where many European countries were still relying on German supplies even after the annexation of Crimea took place. So we have to break up these ties very rapidly. And of course, it's painful and we'll have a difficult winter. But I believe that freedom is worth sacrificing things for. And I hope that this transition away of Russian energy towards energy independence will go hand in hand with our efforts for a green transformation, for more sustainable energy sources. Of course, it is a it's a difficult time for us Europeans, but it's an even more difficult time for those in Ukraine whose houses are being bombed, whose kids are being killed, whose parents are being slaughtered by a genocidal aggression force who targets their country without any justification. So the European Union has to stand on the side of freedom. We have to stand with Ukraine, and we should not give money to a country which was spend it on guns and grenades and on murdering of innocent people. So we have to push through this winter, and we have to be sure that our climate ambitions will be an essential part of the energy independence that we would so much need also from a strategic perspective.
One last question. We know that Italy is going on a parliamentary elections very soon, in just over a month. There is a clear danger and threat that the far right will win on those elections, that Mrs. Giorgia Meloni will be probably the Italian prime minister. We know that she's close to Marine Le Pen in France, to Viktor Orban, and other far-right politicians in Europe. Could that endanger all what European Union is doing now for Ukraine, but also this transition when it comes to energy, and also when it comes to the enlargement on the region of Western Balkans?
Well, there are still some weeks left from the Italian election campaign, and for now I can only hope that the democratic forces and the liberal groupings will eventually be victorious, and Italy will continue to walk the European path that they did so well over the past years. I sincerely hope that the Italian people will vote for pro-European leadership. And the country, it is absolutely essential, of course, for our future joint efforts for green transition and for our European strategic sovereignty project. So of course, nobody knows what will happen on election day, but for now, I'm still hopeful for a good choice.
Katalin Cseh, thank you so much for your time and for this interview.
Thank you very much for having me.